I think this about Jewish music in general, that kind of generational historical deepening that you can get from music that maybe we're not very easily or readily taken from words.
I think one of the Jewishness things about it is there is that phrase from generation to generation. We are kind of I don't know, carrying a torch of sound that looks backwards but also looks forwards.
I lost a music community that I don't think supported us. So the community that I've been part of for over pushing 30 years, I've been part of that community where I felt it was part of my world.
Welcome to Really Jewish, to our conversation about what it is to be Jewish. If you're back for another listen, welcome back. If you're here for the first time, bruchim habaim. We're alternating over the next weeks between guests and me hosting with my co-host Yair Eldan in Jerusalem. This week we're welcoming two guests from the band Oi Va Voi and talking about what it is to be really Jewish and to be a music maker, to be a musician, and excited to welcome them. Oi Va Voi has, I guess, a checkered past in the sense that they've, both a very successful band over the last 20 years, acclaimed with musical awards from different corners of the globe, a band that travels and is well-traveled and well-heeled in the US, in Russia, in Turkey, in Israel, and many venues also in the UK. And it just so happened that one of the Oi Va Voi band members rolled up on my doorstep a couple of years ago and for a couple of years were part of our Havorah community, him and his family. And today we welcome them to talk about a little bit about their Jewish journey and the journey of the band, particularly since October 7th, 2023. Welcome to our guests. Welcome Steve Levi-Kalin and Josh Breslau. It's wonderful to have you both. You're both from Oi Va Voi, some of the original band members running a pretty popular group in North London. You guys have got an interesting journey, both in the history of the band and in the last 2-3 years as a band, and I'm just delighted to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Hi, Oliver.
Thank you so much. And I have to start with one very short story. When Steve walked into my house, Steve, you were part of our Chavurah for a little bit of time, which was lovely. When you walked into my house when we first met, you said, "Oh yeah, I'm part of this band, Oi Va Voi," and I obviously not the smoothest kid on the block, just didn't really know what to do with that. I was like, "Oh, I used to listen to a band called Oi Va Voi back in the day. Must be two different bands." And then after you left, like an hour later, after a lovely cuppa and like scratching my head, I'm like, I made such a tea of myself in front of this guy who's part of a really cool band. I could have just said, "Oh, I love your band," but back then I guess was a little bit starstruck, but not starstruck today. Listen, we're delighted to have you on the show. Tell us a little bit, both. Perhaps we'll start with Steve, just about how you came to Oi Va Voi, a little bit of your background story, and then I've got some, questions to ask about where you sit as a band today and some of the work that you've been doing.
So the band's been going a long time, in fact, over 20 years, and I met a few of my students when I was a student. I met some musicians, and then we kind of took the band from a university band to London, which then kind of formed what we now call Oi Va Voi. And the band became a kind of more serious prospect, if you know what I mean. We worked on kind of originally instrumental ideas, melodies from klezmer tunes, and it was a mainly instrumental band. I'd always been to synagogue a lot when I was a child. I came from quite a traditional family. I used to hear all the melodies that were heard in a shul service, and kind of, I suppose, took a lot of those melodies, into my kind of musical language, I suppose you could say. And I also played a bit of klezmer on the clarinet, but also, I grew up listening to, like everyone, dance music, indie, pop music, hip hop, all the stuff you're exposed to in Britain, in British pop music. And I'd always played in bands. But then I'd only ever played in a band playing guitar and singing in pubs and things like that. I'd never played clarinet in a band. I wasn't even sure that was an option, because not many bands have clarinets in them. So all of a sudden I found I could play clarinet in a band that wasn't an orchestra. And all of a sudden there was a bass guitar and there was drums and there was, it was a really exciting way to sort of take part playing an instrument like a clarinet. So that for me was great. Yeah.
So from back in the day, I love your music, even though I didn't manage to connect the dots when we met just a couple of years ago. You should also mention that you've given us some of our boost of our first few months of Really Jewish podcast, and you've got our intro and outro music on the podcast from your latest single. Josh, how did you find your way to Oi Va Voi? And tell us a little bit more of your journey to this musical height.
Yeah, a strange journey for me. I mean, I had a very secular upbringing, so I wasn't involved in much Jewish culture when I was younger, and I certainly hadn't come across klezmer music, not to any extent that I could pinpoint it in any kind of way. And then in my 20s, I kind of bumped into, I was at a music college, and I bumped into someone who had this band, and he recognized my name. He said, "Hey, you must be Jewish, come and play with my band." And I packed up my drum kit and went along to this session, and these guys were playing klezmer, and it was just kind of something hit me in that moment when I heard that music and I got the opportunity to play. Because up to that point, I'd been playing rock music, hip hop, prog rock, any kind of music you can think of, but I hadn't come across klezmer. And it was just a moment where I suddenly felt connected to this music. And for me, I think personally, it became my Jewish journey over the last 20 years, discovering this music, but also going to lots of places around the world with that music and being exposed to more and more Jewish culture. So it's been a really fascinating journey for me.
So let's get into some of the journey the last couple of years, because you're uniquely placed in many ways. They talk about in these times the Jewish community is the canary in the coal mine, and you're the canary of the canary in the coal mine in terms of a little bit of what you've experienced in recent times. I believe that Really Jewish is not a podcast which attempts to be explicitly political, but I think in order to kind of deepen into the story of the day and some of the journey that you've been on, we need to hear a little bit of that. You've been cancelled from a couple of venues in the last couple of years, and that's been headlines. In reaction to that, you've kind of, I guess, been brought to the forefront of the Jewish story, kind of different outlets telling that story of the experience of Oi Va Voi in relation to those venues. And in particular, Josh, you described in one of our Jewish newspapers, the Jewish community being unheard at this time. So that feels painful from an outsider looking in. Tell us a little bit about that journey, Josh, and how the bands responded and the response you've got from the rest of the community.
So I would pinpoint the journey back to a date that everyone obviously recognizes, well, to just after October 7th for us. We were actually in the studio at the time of October 7th recording our 5th album. And I think Steve would probably agree with me that we did feel something change around that time. There was a kind of chill in the air after October 7th. There was this kind of feeling that for us, we'd been making this album for at that point, probably about a year or maybe a bit longer. And the world that we were going to release that album into was different from the one that we started recording the album in, if you see what I mean. The parameters had changed. People were kind of saying, you know what, best if Jewish people keep their heads down for now. We don't really need to hear from you at the moment, and all that kind of stuff. And there was a real kind of feeling. And at first we couldn't really picture it. We couldn't place what that feeling was. What we felt was, we were in the studio, we were making our music that was inherently Jewish and had all these kind of elements that were important to us. And at the same time, we saw not only October 7th, but then the fallout from that, which was this kind of very nasty development of social media, kind of arguments and fights and statements and all this kind of stuff. And Steve and I talked a lot about that, and we kind of felt we kind of wanted to say something, but at the same time, we didn't want to say anything. We felt it was really important. The most important thing that we could do was not be pushed around by world events, but stay true to our music and keep making the music we want to make, and not feel that we have to come out and make statements on to do with anything else going on in the world, because essentially we're British Jews. And so we really felt that we had to kind of steady ourselves in that kind of environment. I mean, I'd like to hand over to Steve, because that is my perspective on it, but I'd be interested to know if Steve still, we've talked about it in the past, but if that is still relevant for Steve.
No, I agree with that. We, at the time, we thought about, we make a statement, and the trouble is when you make statements, because the environment was changing so quickly, you end up saying a statement then which you have to then clarify the following week and clarify again the week after, because world events keep moving on. And we realized we're not a news outlet, we're a band. So we thought we need to make some music. So we made a song. We wrote a song called Dance Again after one of the famous phrases used by one of the hostages, and recorded that song as part of our new album. And that song is on the new album, and we've played it many times live, and it says better what we wanted to say than if we'd have made countless statements.
And I'd also add that at the same time as sticking to our guns and just kind of being quite tunnel vision with making the music and allowing ourselves to only have creative responses. We were kind of bombarded online with people, sending messages to us on social media, demanding that we give an opinion, demanding like that we explain who's right, who's wrong, demanding that we agree with them that they're right, and all that kind of stuff. And so we really felt like there was nowhere to go in that. There was no nuance. There was nowhere to go. There was no ability of anyone to have 2, 3, 4 kind of competing thoughts in your mind that you were kind of weren't sure about this, weren't sure about that. It was just like, are you with us or are you against us? And it was very clear to us, at least, where the music industry was at that time. The way the music industry was kind of had made its decision, and certain artists had made their decision. And so we just really felt under a lot of pressure, but fundamentally we made a decision that we were going to make our music.
So this is also the point where really Jewish and Oi Va Voi align, because I think part of my ultimate incentive to the podcast is something that was ringing in my head for lots of weeks and lots of months, maybe even more than a year. And the place that I arrived to with it was just to clearly portray what Judaism is without being forced to be like overtly political, which was also something I felt many colleagues and people around the Jewish community were being explicitly called to do. And I also note here, and this episode is not about me, this episode is about you, that I would say something about like 80% of the comments that I get on social media, having been on and now quite more significantly more serious online on social media in the last now couple of months running this podcast, are all from people who want to shout at me, say terrible things about Jewish people, sometimes accuse me of terrible things, not hundreds of messages, but certainly tens of messages. So maybe today this episode is an opportunity for the people in the community who support some of our work and support kind of the message we're bringing of presenting Jewish culture and Judaism at its core, perhaps an opportunity for people to offer comments which are generous and kind and supportive of the band, of Josh and Steve in particular. Guys, let me just back up a second, because we'll return to this story, I am sure, in terms of what the last couple of years has been about. What's really Jewish about Oi Va Voi, and what's really Jewish about the genre of music that you're presenting? Maybe we'll go to Steve first and then to Josh.
So I think in many of our songs, I mean, not all of them, but certainly some of our songs, we've used traditional melodies from, maybe it's influenced by klezmer music, or from the kind of melodies you might hear in a synagogue service that they've been kind of weaved into our songs. Sometimes we've used Hebrew words in our songs. For example, on our first album, we had a song called Od Yeshama, which is used in a wedding ceremony. So we recorded a song that you might hear at a wedding, but we did an Oi Va Voi version. And there are many Od Yeshamas out there, but we did ours. I guess what we did, we kind of put some of this tradition in a kind of modern context, in a modern setting, musically, in the same way as you might kind of develop, I don't know, a modern Jewish way of practice. In other ways, this was in a musical way. And that's what we've tried to do, to kind of set the whole thing in a modern day. We haven't tried to, I don't know, recreate something that's long lost, but we have to play it in a certain way. We're not purists. We don't ever try to sort of copy, other styles. We've made our own styles in that way.
And I love that description from the song We Will Dance, where you describe, I think this is about Jewish music in general, that kind of generational historical deepening that you can get from music that maybe we're not very easily or readily taken from words. The fact that when I listen to some of your songs, I hear, exactly like you say, the notes of the modern, but also the notes of the deeply ancient Jewish tones. That sounds pretty Jewish to me. Go on.
I think one of the Jewish things about it is that there is that phrase from generation to generation. We are kind of I don't know, carrying a torch of sound that looks backwards but also looks forwards. That is kind of I'm mixing metaphors here, aren't I? But I'm trying to explain that there are roots to this stuff that we've tried to place in a modern setting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that you'll find in our music is when we get it right, it's often mournful and triumphant at the same time. It's got this feeling of kind of, there's a bit of sadness, but there's also kind of hope. And that often comes through the instrumentation that we have with, the mournful violin and the kind of excitable clarinet although the clarinet can be mournful as well, and then the triumphant trumpet as well. So we've got this ability within our writing to kind of cover those different emotions, because we can all, as people, feel 2 or 3 or 4 different things at the same time. And so with that often comes out in our music as well, I think. And that's something that's reflected in the Jewish way, I think.
Sounds really Jewish. Okay, so we can return to both those two parts, I guess, the sadness and the hope are my 2 next questions. Tell us 2 words on the experience of being cancelled from the venues. What was that and what did that look like? And how did that feel? Josh, if that's all right.
I mean, yeah, it was a big moment in our lives, basically. It was a devastating moment. I mean, let's remember, we've been on tour promoting our 5th album, and we'd just come back we'd had sold out shows in Turkey, in Holland, in Hungary, Belgium, and we came back to the UK. And you hear about this kind of stuff, but when you actually experience someone questioning your right to play in a UK venue, you kind of do a double take and you think, oh, well, that's not going to happen. And then slowly it dawns on you that it's actually happening, and you get a call or an email from a venue saying, listen, we've had this complaint about you, and you kind of do a double take and you think, what could they be complaining about? And then you see the information, and then we had a call with the venue, and when we finally had the call with the Bristol venue, we had the understanding that I went into this call with the understanding that we were going to talk about how this show could go ahead without any problems, make sure all the security was taken care of. And in that call, they said to us, we've decided to cancel the show. And it's kind of really shocking to be treated in that way. We're very proud of what we've achieved as a band, the little bit that we've tried to add to British Jewish culture over the years, and the fact that we've been able to take that around the world and do that and represent something, and then to be told by someone, because of your Jewishness, who you are has been flagged up, we're going to investigate you and we're going to cancel you. And that's something that I think Steve and I are kind of still coming to terms with. It's a terrible thing to go through. So that happened in Bristol, and then it happened again in Brighton. So we were cancelled at both places.
Listen, there are 2 places that I have connections with. Lived in Brighton for a year. One of my sisters went to university in Bristol. They're also places of rich British culture and musical tradition, and Jewish community in many respects, both with strong and historic Jewish communities in both those places. Chilling to hear.
For me, what was most painful is because I actually live in Brighton as well. So the show that was cancelled in Brighton was the last date on the tour. So for me, it was like, friends and family are going to come, and it was kind of basically the end of 2 or 3 years worth of work, making the album, going on tour, marketing the whole thing. And this was going to be the last show in the place where I lived, the last show of that period of work. So, to live in a place where you're actually told, actually, you can't take the stage because you're Jewish and you might say something that we don't agree with, was particularly painful.
So listen, both British born, I believe, both British, you both carry strong UK accents. You've already said identify as British. Deepen that a little bit for me, Steve. Like, what does that feel like when you're closed out of a cultural milieu, like a cultural story that you really feel part of? Like, how does that hit you, and what does that mean, a few months on, a few years on?
I mean, I think I've been fairly lucky in my life that I've not had too many incidents involving anti-Semitism. I mean, I can think of 2 before this particular cancellation. So in some ways I'm lucky in that sense. And I often thought racism happened to other people. To me, anti-Jewish racism or anti-Semitism, fortunately, was something that, my grandparents would have grown up with, that I thought had been confined to history. I mean, not completely, but I'm a grandson of a Holocaust survivor. It's very deep in my family, the whole history of the Second World War and everything that went on. And when it actually comes to your door, when it involves you, it's quite a shock, and you're not used to dealing with it. I have to say, though, we've had fantastic support from the Jewish community in terms of messages of support online, people saying that, supportive things to me and to the band. I feel lucky that we've got a sort of the community behind us in that way. I don't know how Josh feels about that, but yeah, so it's not something I was used to dealing with. It's all linked to what's going on in the Middle East. It's unfortunate to say, but it's true.
Yeah. Josh, tell us how it affected you and your life.
I would say that the way I look at it is that, so I was always told by my dad, who's 96 this year, I was always told, just be careful, antisemitism is just under the surface. A lot of people were told that growing up. I'm sure most Jewish people would have been told that. And maybe I was naive, but you perceive that as being, watch out for the fascists, watch out for the hard right. They're waiting. And you kind of expect that society is going to keep that kind of under control. And I think what's really disappointing for me throughout all of this. And I know you don't want to go into politics too much on this, but I think for me, what's so disappointing at the moment is to see how this anti-Jewish racism is manifesting itself on the left of our society. And because I'm from the left, so I feel that from our cancellations, I lost two things. I lost, firstly, a music community that I don't think supported us. So the community that I've been part of for, over, pushing 30 years, I've been part of that community where I felt it was part of my world. Secondly, I felt like my political home was on the left, what we'd probably call the progressive left. I mean, I care about the things that the progressive left claims to care about, except that the progressive left today seems to have a blind spot, a very serious blind spot. And that's what's really difficult to see, because Steve and I work in an environment which is a cultural environment. And we kind of assume that the people that look after the cultural environment in our country today are the people that kind of come from the left, and they care about human rights, and they care about the moral good, and they care about the things that the hard right don't claim to care about. So we don't have this expectation of the hard right caring about human rights, caring about racism, caring about inclusivity, those kind of things. The left claim to care about that stuff, but they're letting the Jewish community down. In my experience, and I don't speak for all Jewish people, I speak for myself as someone that's experienced something. I want to be clear about that. I know there are plenty of Jewish people that don't feel that they've been let down by the left. I fundamentally do feel that I've been let down by the music industry, the cultural sector, and the progressive left in our country. So that's what's changed for me. It's a kind of an opening of my eyes in that way.
Listen, I think there are lots of, I've said on this podcast before, there are lots of people who I speak to sometimes on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, month to month, week to week, who feel very let down by their various sectors, whether it's in culture, in medicine, in the NHS, in the therapeutic world, you name it. There are people who feel in some way or another just let down and squeezed out of that kind of place that Jews were very comfortable in, which is to say that we felt at home. And I can say that as well. I think, I can happily say that before October 7th, 2023, I'd never really experienced anti-Semitism, maybe apart from people getting their heads kicked in after school, which was a normal experience of the JFS in Camden Town. I hadn't really experienced, certainly as an adult, anti-Semitism. And after October 7th, for the first time, 2-3 like big moments in my own journey where I experienced very explicit anti-Semitism, hard to listen to. And the experience of then losing a part of our political home also which we helped develop alongside music and culture in this country. I think the Jewish community have had a significant impact on, socialist, leftist, whatever is progressive left politics over the generations, and many Jewish people in the Jewish community feel that space is certainly not theirs anymore. So I appreciate you naming that here. What gives you hope? Like, what are the aspects of hope? What's perhaps a silver lining at this time? Steve, you mentioned beautifully. I think I also called you after I heard your cancellation. I don't know if maybe it was a text message or a call just to say what's up. I'm pleased that you feel emboldened by the support you've felt from the community. But Steve, what's given you hope at this time?
I mean, there's a couple of things. I'm lucky enough to have kids, and I see in them like another chance, another generation, maybe get things right that we've all got wrong, and I kind of hope that they're not weighed down by the kind of life's grind that we are, and a new start. So I think children. I play quite often in assemblies at my kids' local school. I do Jewish assemblies for them. I play music. I get them all dancing. I get them all singing. And just seeing that, and this is a non-Jewish school, by the way, kids from all different backgrounds. They're not interested in who does what. They're singing along. They're dancing. They're joining in. They don't care about all this stuff that we all worry about. So when I see all that, that gives me hope. And then the second thing that gives me hope is when we do a gig, when we're in front of a crowd, and we've got all those people out there and they're singing along. We play a lot in Turkey. It's our most popular country. Majority of people in Turkey aren't Jewish. It's a Muslim country. People come along, very positive, very supportive. They don't question, they don't ask, anything to do with that. They're singing along, they're enjoying the music. They don't have to be Jewish. So it's when I see that, I know that music is, maybe it's a bit of a cliche, but it's like a universal language, and there's not much that speaks to most people like music does. Uh, all kinds of people love it. So that.
So something very specific. Um, since October 7th, there's been a phrase, and that phrase has been plastered on billboards, it's been on leaflets, it's been films, it's been songs, it's been poems. 4 words: we will dance again. The thing that gives me hope about that is that when something so devastating happens, like we're talking a massacre. So when a massacre happens, the danger is that what people call for is vengeance. Like, and I'm talking about the everyday people in their music and in their art and in the way they speak. They call for vengeance. We will dance again. The phrase is not calling for vengeance, is calling for better times. We will have better times. We will dance again. And I think that's something that's so, so important in these times, and something that I've learned and kind of experienced so I've experienced more Jewish circles since this whole period has started. I've become much more engaged and much more involved. And it makes me think there's a line I'll draw with another song that we wrote a song called Dance Again, which was playing on those words as well, which was a triumphant song, which was a song about looking to the future and a song about hope. And it makes me also think about another song we've written, and we must be one of the very few bands, if not the only band out there, who's actually written a song twice about a massacre. Because previously, on one of our previous albums, we've written a song about a massacre, a song called Esprent, which took words from a famous poet called Mordecai Gilberti. And he wrote this song, Esprent, and it was about a pogrom that happened. It was a village that was burning. This song, these words are so mournful. They're so desperate, and they're so kind of devoid of hope. And it's an awful, awful song that's on our 3rd album. And it's a really mournful song. But I think what's really important is with this song, We Will Dance Again, is just people looking for better days and looking for hope. And that's what gives me hope, is that the fact that everyone is looking for that. People aren't, people are talking about finding the light, and people are talking about We Will Dance Again. That's what gives me hope, that people are thinking in that way.
The image that comes across in Strength is from one of the psalms we sing, "Dima yiksaru," that from the tears that we cry, we will kind of harvest again. I guess an agricultural image rather than a musical image. Something about the all those tears that have been shed, also kind of nourishing and fertilizing the soil for the next crop, for the next generation, for moments of hope. Guys, just to finish up, Josh, is there a visual image of Jewish life or a Jewish practice that kind of holds you at this time? You said that your Judaism or your collective Jewish community is somehow strengthened in this time. Is there an image or a line from our Jewish liturgy which shapes you or strengthens you in these days?
I mean, I touched on it briefly there. I mean, I am still, I'm a secular person, but I think in all the people, I've met so many amazing people over this last period of time, and my kind of Jewish world has expanded so much. And the thing that keeps coming back is keeping the light. People talk about light, let the light in, keep the light, different kind of phrases, different kind of versions of light. And I think that's so important when there are, it speaks for itself. It means something that so many people feel that we're in dark times, but they're really, really determined to find the light. That says a lot to me, even as someone who does not know much about the actual kind of religious side of Judaism. That speaks to me.
Yeah, so there's a song we have on our latest album called The Water's Edge. And the song is about, it relates to Rosh Hashanah, where you throw your things that you'd rather leave behind down the river, and you put them behind you, and you kind of move on, and in hope for a kind of better future. And we've got that song on our album called The Water's Edge. And I think, if we can throw some of these things down the river, metaphorically speaking, it's it's a Jewish thing, isn't it? Not to get caught up and to be stuck, and to kind of find a way through something and look forward. The whole Jewish experience is full of tragedy and wonderful moments, but also tragedy through so many different, for the last how many thousands of years. Most of our festivals are related to that, aren't they? Whether it's Hanukkah or Purim, or we're threatened. There's a jeopardy to us, but we find a way through, and we manage to carry on, and that continuity is what has kept us all
I want
going.
to thank you for the continuity. I want to thank you for this relationship, for coming on our podcast. I hear a lot of strength from your words, and I hear a lot of strength from the fact that you have been strengthened from the Jewish community and you're carrying on and you will carry on playing music. Just, Josh, to finish up, just tell us where people can find you and when you're next playing.
They can find us all over the internet. We're on Spotify, we're on iTunes, we're on Instagram. The next shows are actually in Hungary later this year, and Turkey and Greece, probably UK later this year or early next year.
It was just a great interview with Steve and Josh. Oi Va Voi. I mean, it's a story which I think many people in the Jewish community can relate to, about feeling in some way or other closed out of the Jewish community. I think, having grown up like these guys, crazily, I'm roughly the same age as these people who have been in the music business for 20 years. Having grown up in a country where I felt very much at home, very much included, very much part of the tapestry and framework of Jewish life, in politics, in music, in culture, in art, in the sciences, in university. I think many people in the Jewish community have felt included. And a part of their story is very chilling about suddenly, because you're Jewish, being closed out. Now, Oi Va Voi have become part of the story of Really Jewish. We've just celebrated our 10th chapter, our 10th episode, and Oi Va Voi have come on to talk a little bit about their Jewish journey. They've given of their music to this podcast with no charge, supporting the work of our initiative to bring the voice of the Jewish community and a little slice of the Jewish story to this podcast platform. And I feel sad for this Advent that a band that is, truly committed not just to British culture and music, but also, on a European spectrum, to spreading klezmer and spreading this intricate tapestry of different layers and different generations of music and musicality and storytelling through the music, has experienced even one moment of harassment and exclusion, let alone a couple or more. I was struck by Josh Breslau and his description of light, that kind of image of hope. We have the menorah that we light, the Hanukkah, in the moment, in the greatest darkness of the year, at the opposite end of the year of where we are now. We light the light and celebrate spreading of that light, Prisume Nisa, and there's a way in which Oi Va Voi, the band, are spreading that light in an unapologetic way, proudly representing themselves as Jewish and proudly spreading one of the aspects of Jewish life and culture and entertainment to many corners, certainly of the UK and of Europe. I also related to Steve's description of the water's edge, image that I also have thought about and taught in recent times. I think the Me'orei Naim, the Chernobyl Rebbe, talks about the Metzer Yam, Mitzrayim. Why do we learn about Egypt? Why do we talk about Egypt in every day of our Jewish lives, and particularly on Passover? Because Egypt is Metzer Yam, is the edge of the waters. And somehow, by learning about deprivation, by learning about moments of profound risk and sadness and vulnerability, that's where we get to the water's edge. That's how we get to the water's edge. And the Jewish imagination, what is the water's edge? The water's edge is wisdom. Wisdom itself is described as mayim, as yam, as water. And those weren't the words of Steve, but there's something there about touching the void, about experiencing the eternal or experiencing the unquenched, the unimaginable by way of music, by way of Jewish tradition, by way of Jewish lore and fable. A lot of that came through in the interview. And Steve also spoke about children, about the next generation. I guess for many people who live in the UK, the hope is that we are living through dark times, but that somehow the next generation will get it together and that Jews will return to that space of feeling utterly at one with European culture, inside European music, inside European UK society. I don't think there are many people who are feeling that hopeful at this moment in time, but that's certainly the aspiration that many people raising children in this country and beyond will hold. Thanks for listening along. That felt like meaningful to have a conversation with Josh and Steve about what it is to be really Jewish and how Oi Va Voi is really Jewish. Hope you got something from this podcast. Thank you to Oi Va Voi for their musical addition to this podcast. Not only were they on today's episode, but they also have given clips from their newest single, Back to My Roots, which is available on streaming platforms. They've given clips of that for the outro and intro of this podcast. They've got gigs coming up. Steve mentioned a couple of them in Hungary going forward. And I really encourage people to reach out to the band on social media elsewhere and to me offering support, because that also feels really important. If you can just say hello, support the work, like what you're doing, that is something that lifts people up and drowns out a little bit of the noise of some of the more aggressive and violent and nasty messages that many people who are on social media are getting at the moment. We've built this podcast from the ground up. It helps us if you share and review this podcast wherever you listen to it, and share and link to our clips on Instagram, TikTok and Facebook. And finally, if you want to support us and become our first donors on Patreon, you're very welcome. I just got some kit this week, 2 new microphones for Yair and I, by way of generous donations from a class that I teach called Lech Techa, 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night on Zoom. And a few of the people in the class have clubbed together to offer tangible material support for this podcast to get us some new kit. So if you want to do all or any of that, then be in touch. And join us next week for more from Really Jewish with Yair Eldan and Oliver Joseph. Thanks so much.